welcome to Blackman Folktales. Kindly subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also like and share. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell, as this means the whole world to us. The child nobody wanted became the star everyone needed. The night Eliana was born was one the townspeople would never forget. Not because of her, but because of the storm that battered the small, crumbling hospital on the edge of Hollow Creek. The rain came down in torrents, lashing against rusted window frames, while thunder rolled so violently that nurses whispered it was a bad omen. Inside the delivery room, a young woman with hollow eyes and trembling hands gave birth to a baby girl. The child cried loudly, her voice carrying above the storm as though demanding to be heard, but her mother would not look at her. Fear etched itself into every line of the woman's face as she turned her head away. She was barely more than a child herself, broken by circumstances the world had shoved upon her too soon. With a sob, she whispered words no one could quite catch, then insisted the nurse take the baby away. By dawn, she was gone, vanished into the storm as though she had never been there. All that remained was the baby, wrapped in a threadbare hospital blanket, her name hastily scribbled on a birth certificate. Eliana. And so her story began not with love or a lullaby, but with abandonment, an invisible wound carved into her soul before she could even open her eyes to the world. Eliana's childhood was not one of sweet lullabies or birthday candles, but a blur of strange houses and stranger faces. She became a child passed from hand to hand, a burden no one wanted for too long. Foster families took her in with forced smiles, only to return her months later with excuses. She doesn't fit with us. She's too quiet, or worse, there's something unsettling about her. Other children mocked her for not knowing her real parents, calling her the leftover or the throwaway. Eliana learned early how to survive by shrinking into herself, moving quietly, eating quickly, never making demands. But there were nights, long nights, when she couldn't contain the ache inside. In the dark, she would sing, softly at first, almost a hum, but slowly her voice would rise, trembling and unsteady, until it filled whatever room she occupied. Her songs weren't joyful. They were haunting, fragile, and soaked in longing. And though no one knew it then, her voice carried the weight of her story, the sound of a child desperately aching to belong. Sometimes foster siblings would pause outside her door, listening in silence, not daring to admit that her voice made them cry. But the adults ignored it, brushing it off as noise. To them, she was still just the child nobody wanted, a girl marked by rejection, a shadow in their house. And so she drifted from one family to the next, carrying her voice like a secret, never realizing it was the only light she had been given in a world that seemed determined to keep her in darkness. By the time Eliana turned 12, she had learned the hardest lesson of all. People didn't just leave, they forgot. Birthdays passed without candles, achievements went unnoticed, and even her tears no longer drew comfort. To the system, she was just another file, another child shuffled through paperwork, her story nothing more than a case number. But deep inside, Eliana clung to something she couldn't quite name, a fragile, flickering belief that she was meant for more than rejection. She would lie awake at night, staring at cracked ceilings, whispering promises to herself. One day they'll see me. One day I won't be invisible. It was this whispered vow that kept her from breaking completely, and as she grew older, her voice grew stronger, no longer a soft hum, but something commanding, aching, almost prophetic. Yet still, she never let anyone truly hear it. Fear wrapped around her gift like chains, fear of ridicule, fear of rejection, fear that if they saw her heart, through her voice, they would discard her all over again. She lived between two worlds, the visible world where she was nobody, and the secret world where her voice made her somebody. And though she did not know it then, the storms that marked her birth were not a curse, but a warning. One day, Eliana's voice would shake the world just as that storm had shaken the hospital walls. One day, the child nobody wanted would become the star everyone needed, but first, she would have to survive the years of silence, shadows, and scars that sought to destroy her. By the time Eliana turned 16, she had become an expert at disappearing into the background of life. In school, she was the quiet girl no one noticed, the one who sat in the back of the class, sketching in the corners of her notebooks, or scribbling lyrics she never dared to sing aloud. Teachers pitied her but rarely invested in her, and classmates mocked her when they remembered she existed. It was a lonely, suffocating existence, And yet Eliana endured it because she had no choice. Then one day, a notice was posted on the bulletin board at school. Hollow Creek's annual talent show. Students crowded around it, buzzing with excitement, while Eliana stood in the corner, listening. She had watched the show in years past, always from the shadows, watching the same popular kids take the stage with flashy dance numbers and scripted comedy routines. They were adored, cheered, celebrated. Eliana had never once considered that stage for herself. What right did she have to stand in that light? And yet, that night as she lay in bed, staring at the peeling paint of the foster home's ceiling, the thought burned inside her. What if? What if she dared to step into the spotlight? What if, for once in her life, people actually saw her? The question was terrifying, but it refused to leave her mind. The following week, she carried the secret like a fire in her chest. Every time she passed the auditorium doors, her heart quickened, her palms sweaty. She could almost see herself there, standing with trembling hands, singing the words she whispered into the dark. But fear was her constant companion, whispering cruel reminders. They'll laugh at you. You'll embarrass yourself. You're not good enough. And then there were the voices of her foster siblings, sharp mocking. When they overheard her humming as she did the dishes, one of them sneered, "Oh, so the throwaway thinks she's a singer now?" Their laughter rang in her ears long after. Still, the dream refused to die. Eliana found herself sneaking into the music room after hours, pressing her fingers against the old piano keys, testing melodies she had never dared to voice fully. The emptiness of the room became her secret audience. And though fear clung to her, the act of singing there alone, unseen, ignited something new, possibility. By the time the day of sign-ups came, she hovered near the sheet for almost an hour, her hand trembling over the pen. Students snickered, watching her hesitate, but at last she scrawled her name. It was messy, rushed, but real, and in that moment, for the first time in her life, Eliana had chosen herself. The night of the show arrived faster than she expected, and it felt like walking into a storm without shelter. The auditorium buzzed with chatter, the lights too bright, the air heavy with anticipation. She watched from backstage as one act after another drew laughter and applause. A group of dancers twirled in sparkling costumes. A boy with a guitar strummed a familiar pop song that had the audience singing along. Every cheer, every clap made Eliana's heart sink deeper. By the time her name was called, her body was trembling so violently she thought she might collapse. As she stepped into the light, the whispers began. "Isn't that the foster girl? What's she even doing here?" Some laughed under their breath. Others smirked openly. Eliana stood frozen, the microphone cold in her hand, her throat dry. For a moment, it felt as though the ground would open and swallow her whole. But then, somewhere in the crowd, a child coughed, the sound breaking the suffocating silence. Eliana closed her eyes, gripped the microphone tighter, and took a breath that seemed to reach the deepest parts of her being. And then she sang. The first note that left her lips was soft, fragile, and wavering like a candle flame. But then it grew, rising, steadying, spreading across the auditorium until every whisper stilled, every mocking smirk faded into silence. Her voice poured out like a flood, carrying years of loneliness, rejection, and yearning in every syllable. She sang as though she were bleeding out her soul, and the sound was both devastating and breathtaking. People leaned forward in their seats, their faces transformed, eyes glistening with tears they didn't expect. Even the judges, who moments ago had been exchanging skeptical looks, sat frozen, their pens hanging in midair. Eliana wasn't simply singing. She was opening a wound and letting them hear the truth of her life, and it shook them. By the time she reached the chorus, her voice soared, trembling with power that seemed impossible for someone so small, so fragile-looking. The storm that had marked her birth seemed to echo in her song, a force that could not be ignored. When the last note faded into the silence, the world seemed to hold its breath. Eliana opened her eyes slowly, expecting laughter, ridicule, dismissal. But instead, the silence broke into thunder. The audience rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some openly weeping. Teachers who had barely acknowledged her in class now wiped their eyes, stunned. Classmates who had whispered insults were shouting her name. It was as if the very walls of the auditorium had shifted, and for the first time in her life, Eliana was not invisible. She was radiant. Her knees almost buckled beneath her as tears stung her eyes, but not from sadness. This time, It was from something she had never truly known: belonging. The judges, one by one, rose to their feet in a standing ovation, shaking their heads in disbelief. The host rushed onto the stage, grinning so wide it seemed his face might break. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, "we have just witnessed something unforgettable." Eliana barely heard him. Her hands shook as she clutched the microphone, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. She had done it. She had been seen. The days that followed were a blur. By the next morning, someone had uploaded a shaky video of her performance online, and within hours it had spread beyond Hollow Creek. Messages poured in, strangers writing from other towns, even other states, saying her voice had touched them, saved them, made them cry. Local newspapers ran headlines calling her the Angel of Hollow Creek. Producers began reaching out. Schools invited her to sing at their events, and for the first time, people wanted Eliana. She should have felt nothing but joy, but a strange fear shadowed her every step. She wasn't used to attention. She didn't know how to carry it. And deep down, a voice whispered, "It won't last. They'll turn on you. They always do." She tried to silence it, but it lingered like a shadow behind the applause. Still, as she walked through the school halls, classmates who had ignored her now greeted her with awe. Teachers offered her words of praise. The foster family, who had barely spoken to her, acted proud, as though they had always believed in her. But Eliana knew better. People's admiration was fickle, and already, beneath the surface, whispers of jealousy were rising. Her gift had set her apart, but it had also made her a target. And while the world saw her as a rising star, Eliana could feel the storm building again, one she was not sure she was strong enough to face. Eliana's rise to local fame was swift, almost dizzying. Invitations arrived at the foster home daily. Requests for interviews, appearances, offers to record songs. She was suddenly surrounded by lights and cameras, people who wanted pieces of her story. At first, it felt like a dream. Strangers telling her she was inspiring, journalists calling her a voice of hope. But beneath the surface, not all attention was kind. Rumors began swirling, whispered by jealous classmates and bitter rivals. "She's faking it," some said. "She's just a foster kid trying to get sympathy." Others claimed her story was made up, that she exaggerated her pain to gain popularity. Even in the foster home, tension grew. Her foster siblings, who once ignored her, now scowled when reporters came to the house. One hissed at her one evening, "Don't get too comfortable. They'll forget you just like everyone else has." Their words cut deep, reopening wounds she thought her music had healed. Eliana tried to smile for the cameras, but when the lights went off, the doubts crept back in. Was she truly special, or just a temporary fascination? The whispers turned into something darker when a rival contestant from the talent show, a girl named Marissa, began spreading lies. Marissa told anyone who would listen that Eliana had stolen her song, that she had tricked the judges with a sob story. Soon, anonymous online comments followed, cruel words calling Eliana a fraud, telling her she would never last. Each message was like a dagger, tearing at the fragile confidence she had built. She lay awake at night, scrolling through the hate, her heart sinking lower with every word. But the most painful betrayal came not from strangers, but from within her own home. She overheard her foster mother on the phone, speaking in a low voice to a reporter. "Yes, she's here. Yes, I can tell you things about her. For a price." Eliana froze in the hallway, her chest tight with betrayal. The very people who were supposed to care for her were selling her story like merchandise. It was a cruel reminder. No matter how brightly she shone, she was still the child nobody wanted. Then came the letter. It arrived on a rainy afternoon, tucked inside a plain envelope with no return address. Eliana almost didn't open it, assuming it was another cruel note from strangers. But when she unfolded the paper, her hands trembled. The handwriting was shaky, almost hesitant, and the words stopped her breath cold. "Eliana, I am your mother. I need to see you. Please." For minutes, she could do nothing but stare at the page, her mind reeling. Her mother, the woman who had abandoned her at birth, the ghost who had haunted her entire existence, was suddenly reaching out. Why now? After 16 years of silence, why appear only when Eliana's name was on people's lips? A mixture of anger, longing, and confusion battled inside her chest. Part of her yearned to know the truth, to finally have answers. But another part screamed that this was a trap, another betrayal waiting to happen. She clutched the letter in trembling hands, her heart pounding with a single question. Was this the beginning of healing, or the start of her greatest heartbreak yet? Eliana read the letter over and over, as if the words would change each time her eyes touched the paper. I am your mother. I need to see you. Please. 16 years of absence, condensed into one shaky sentence. Rage and longing collided inside her chest, confusing her so much she felt sick. Part of her wanted to tear the letter into shreds, to scream that she didn't need a woman who had abandoned her. Yet another part, the child deep inside who had cried herself to sleep countless nights, ached for this moment. Maybe her mother had a reason. Maybe there was a story she had never known, something that could explain the unbearable silence of all those years. Days turned into sleepless nights as she wrestled with the decision. Should she meet her, or protect the fragile peace she was beginning to build? The more she tried to ignore it, the more the letter seemed to whisper to her from its hiding place under her pillow. At last, trembling and uncertain, she agreed to meet. The reunion took place in a small cafe on the edge of town. Eliana arrived early, her stomach churning, hands cold, heart pounding so loudly she feared everyone could hear it. Then a woman walked in, tall, thin, with tired eyes and the kind of beauty that looked worn down by years of hardship. Their eyes met, and for a moment the cafe seemed to fade. This was her mother, the woman who had left her behind. She sat down slowly, reaching across the table with trembling fingers. Eliana, she whispered, her voice breaking. I have thought of you every day. The words hit Eliana like a storm. She wanted to believe them, but suspicion crept in. Where had she been all this time? Why now? Her mother spoke of poverty, fear, of being too young to raise a child. She said she had made mistakes, but never stopped loving her. Tears filled Eliana's eyes, yet so did questions. Love. Where was that love when she cried alone in strange houses, begging for someone to hold her? Where was it when she endured the cruelty of other children? Still, Eliana couldn't deny the ache in her chest, the desperate hunger for a mother's love. She left the cafe shaken, torn between forgiveness and doubt, not knowing that this meeting would only deepen the shadows closing in around her. Over the next few weeks, her mother tried to weave her way into Eliana's new life. She came to rehearsals, sent her flowers, spoke to reporters as though she had always been present. At first, people praised the heartwarming reunion, painting their story as one of redemption and forgiveness. But beneath the smiles and photographs, cracks began to show. Eliana overheard hushed conversations between her mother and her new manager, discussions that always seemed to revolve around money and publicity. Doubt gnawed at her. Was this truly love, or exploitation disguised as affection? Once, she confronted her mother late at night, her voice trembling with suppressed pain. Why now? Why didn't you come back when I was a child, when I needed you most? Her mother's face darkened, her excuses weak, her tone defensive. You don't understand, Eliana. Life isn't that simple. The answer left Eliana hollow, suspicion blooming into dread. She wanted to trust, to believe in a bond she had been denied all her life, but the unease in her heart whispered that she was being used once again, this time not just as a child, but as a rising star. The truth unraveled one night, when Eliana returned to the foster home to find reporters waiting outside, cameras flashing, microphones shoved in her face. They bombarded her with invasive questions about her childhood, asking about private details she had never shared with anyone. Confused and shaken, she demanded to know where they got their information. Days later, the betrayal was revealed in the ugliest way possible. Her mother had sold her story. The woman who had once begged for forgiveness had been feeding the press for money, painting herself as the tragic heroine while exploiting Eliana's pain. When Eliana confronted her, her mother didn't deny it. I did what I had to do, she said coldly, and don't act like you don't benefit from it too. The words cut deeper than any knife. Eliana had spent her entire life longing for this woman, clinging to the idea that somewhere in the world was a mother who loved her. And now, to discover that even her return was nothing more than greed, it broke her in ways she couldn't put into words. She locked herself in her room, sobbing until her voice cracked, questioning why love always came wrapped in betrayal. As her fame grew, the weight of lies and sabotage grew heavier. Online trolls called her ungrateful. Former foster families emerged, each one twisting stories, claiming they had raised her, just to steal a piece of the spotlight. Marissa, her bitter rival, spread doctored recordings, trying to prove that Eliana used autotune, that she wasn't as talented as she appeared. Even her manager, who had once promised to protect her, began pressuring her into exhausting schedules, warning her that she would lose relevance if she didn't comply. Eliana was drowning. Her voice, the very thing that had saved her, now felt like a cage. Her chest tightened with every performance, fear gripping her before every stage entrance. What if the whispers were true? What if she was nothing but a fraud? The spotlight that once felt like warmth now burned her skin, exposing her scars, her doubts, her brokenness. Night after night, she collapsed in bed, wishing she could disappear. For the first time since the storm of her birth, Eliana considered giving up, not just on singing, but on life itself. Her breaking point came on the eve of her biggest televised performance, a concert broadcast live to millions. Backstage, chaos erupted. Her estranged mother stormed the venue, demanding to see her, screaming at security that she was entitled to be there. Paparazzi swarmed, snapping pictures of the drama. Inside her dressing room, Eliana crumpled to the floor, her breath shallow, her vision blurred by tears. She could hear the muffled roar of the audience waiting, but she couldn't move. She was that unwanted child again, invisible and unworthy, suffocated by betrayal and lies. Then, in the midst of her despair, she heard something, a whisper deep inside her soul, the echo of the promise she had made as a child staring at cracked ceilings. One day they'll see me. One day I won't be invisible. The memory lit a spark in her. Slowly, trembling, she rose to her feet. She wiped her tears, steadied her breathing, and looked at her reflection in the mirror. She wasn't just the foster girl anymore. She wasn't just the child nobody wanted. She was Eliana, and she still had her voice. With that thought, she walked toward the stage, ready to face the world one last time. The audience erupted in cheers, but she barely heard them. She gripped the microphone and stood still, letting the silence settle, forcing herself to breathe. Millions of eyes were on her, waiting. Her mother's screams still echoed in her ears. The betrayals still clawed at her heart, but in that moment she realized something profound. She wasn't singing for them. Not for her mother. Not for the critics. Not even for the fame-hungry crowd. She was singing for the child she once was, the girl who cried herself to sleep, who hummed songs in the dark when no one cared to listen. And she was singing for everyone like her. The forgotten, the rejected, the invisible souls who longed to be seen. With that, she began. The first verse was soft, trembling, but charged with emotion. As her voice rose, the atmosphere in the auditorium shifted. People leaned forward, captivated not just by the sound, but by the raw truth in her tone. She sang of abandonment, of loneliness, of scars that refused to fade, but also of hope, of resilience, of light breaking through the darkest nights. Every note carried her journey. The storm of her birth, the years of rejection, the betrayal of her mother, the crushing weight of doubt. By the chorus, her voice swelled with a power that seemed to come from beyond her, filling every corner of the hall and reaching through the cameras into the homes of millions. The audience wept openly, some clasping hands, others standing in reverence. It wasn't just a performance, it was a revelation, a message carved from pain and transformed into something transcendent. For those few minutes, Eliana's voice belonged not to her, but to everyone who had ever felt unwanted. When the final note faded, silence fell, thick, heavy, holy. Then, like a wave breaking, the auditorium erupted into thunderous applause. People rose to their feet, tears streaming, cheering until the walls shook. Eliana stood there, chest heaving, tears glistening in her own eyes, overwhelmed not by the noise, but by the realization of what had just happened. She had taken her deepest wounds and turned them into light. She had become more than the child nobody wanted. She had become the star everyone needed. In that moment, she understood. Her story wasn't about rejection, but redemption. Not about abandonment, but about resilience. And though betrayal and shadows would always linger at the edges, they no longer defined her. She lifted the microphone one last time, her voice steady, her eyes shining with tears. "This song," she whispered, "is for everyone who was ever told they weren't enough. You are enough. You are everything." The cheers that followed weren't just applause. They were the sound of countless souls being seen, being healed. And in that sacred moment, Eliana finally knew she had found her place. She was home, Fame had a way of painting everything in gold, yet beneath the shimmer, shadows grew darker. For Eliana, the applause was deafening, the lights blinding, and the world's sudden affections suffocating in ways she hadn't expected. Once, she had longed for even a single person to notice her existence, and now millions adored her. But with every article praising her voice, every magazine cover that called her the voice of a generation, Eliana felt a gnawing fear she couldn't shake. What if they knew the truth? The truth that she was abandoned, unloved, and for years treated as a mistake no one wanted. Behind her radiant smile on stage, there lived a fragile girl who still remembered the sound of slamming doors in foster homes and the cold sting of being told she didn't belong. And now, whispers were starting to circulate. Reporters digging into her past, tabloids hungry for the mystery of her origin. Questions swirled. Asterisk, who were her real parents? Why was she abandoned? Why did no one claim her when she rose to fame? Asterisk to the world. These were curiosities. To Eliana, they were landmines. Each rumor was a reminder that her carefully built life was standing on shaky ground. And if the truth emerged, she feared everything she had become. The applause, the respect, the love of millions would crumble into dust. It began with a letter. One evening, after another performance that ended in standing ovations, Eliana returned to her dressing room to find a plain envelope resting on the vanity mirror. No name, no return address. Just her own name scrawled in uneven handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it, expecting perhaps a fan's desperate plea or an admirer's confession. But the words inside made her blood run cold. Asterisk, they never told you the truth. I know who left you. I know why. If you want answers, meet me where the storm began. Asterisk, Eliana read it over and over, her heart pounding louder with each repetition. Where the storm began. She knew exactly what that meant. Hollow Creek Hospital, the place of her birth, long abandoned and left to rot on the edge of town. For years, she had buried the memories of that night, the storm that stole her mother and left her nameless. And now someone was pulling her back there. Panic warred with desperation. Who could have sent it? A cruel stranger toying with her? Or someone who truly knew the secrets buried in her past? The temptation was unbearable. She had fought so hard to become more than her scars. But the child in her, the child who used to cry in the dark for answers, was still alive, still aching. And that child whispered to her, asterisk go. Find out, even if it breaks you, asterisk. That night, Eliana couldn't sleep. The letter haunted her, its words etched into her mind like fire. She sat at the edge of her bed in the penthouse, sweet the world envied, staring at the city lights outside, realizing how hollow they felt compared to the shadows inside her. For years, she had sung of pain, longing, and hope, and her fans claimed her songs healed them. But what they didn't know was that every lyric came from wounds that had never healed in her own heart. She thought about the people who once called her unwanted, about the families that tossed her aside, and about the empty space where her mother's embrace should have been. Now, for the first time, there was a chance, however slim, that she could discover why. Could she face it? Could she risk tearing open scars that had barely scabbed over? Fear told her to ignore the letter, to continue basking in the safety of the fame she had built. But her heart, the same heart that had kept her alive in silence, the same heart that turned her pain into music, pulled her toward the storm's beginning. She knew she wouldn't be able to resist. Somewhere in Hollow Creek, answers waited. Answers she had chased all her life. And though they could destroy her, not knowing was worse. By dawn, Eliana had made her decision. She would return. She would walk into the shadows of her past, even if it shattered her future. The journey back to Hollow Creek was surreal, like stepping into a dream she had tried to forget. As her car wound through the narrow, broken roads that led to the forgotten town, every rusted sign and decaying building seemed to whisper of abandonment. By the time she reached the old hospital, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the structure bathed in eerie moonlight. The building stood like a skeleton of secrets. Windows shattered, doors hanging loose, vines crawling across its walls like veins. Eliana's chest tightened as she stepped out of the car, the night air biting against her skin. She clutched the letter in her pocket, her only compass in this maze of fear and curiosity. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the creak of the building as the wind pushed through it. Her footsteps echoed on the cracked concrete as she entered, the air heavy with dust and forgotten cries. Every shadow felt alive, Every flicker of moonlight across broken glass made her flinch. Then she heard it, a voice. Soft, low, almost a whisper. "You came." Eliana froze, her heart leaping into her throat. In the corner of the ruined hallway, a figure stepped forward, cloaked in darkness. She couldn't see the face, only the outline. But something about the voice made her skin prickle. It was familiar, hauntingly familiar. And in that moment, Eliana realized that the truth she had chased all her life was finally standing before her. Whether it would heal her or destroy her, she didn't yet know. But the storm had begun again. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more.